conversation with our colleagues from Partners of Health and Wholeness and the North Carolina Council of Churches. Before we get started, I just want to kind of give us a brief overview of our webinar logistics and the way that we're going to go about this conversation. So first of all, as you have noticed, I'm the only one who you can see currently. We are asking that folks who are not speaking, who are not presenting on this webinar, please stay muted and keep your video off just to keep things a little bit easier for those of us who are speaking. So thank you for doing that. We also have the capability of muting you. So if you notice that that's happened, that's why. We also ask that you go to the chat box, which if you hover your mouse down at the bottom of this screen, you will see a text blurb that says chat. In the chat box, you can ask questions throughout our webinar. You can also, and we would love it if you would put your name and your city and your congregation or organization just to kind of give us an idea of who all is here. That would be wonderful. So thank you for doing that. We also ask that you let us know in the chat box if you cannot hear us or if you're having a hard time with our videos freezing, if there's any kind of technological issues happening, that would be a great place to let us know that that's happening. Thank you so much for doing that. Also, I wanted to say, if you wanted to put your email into the chat box as well, some of you registered for this webinar, and if you registered, you will receive a recording of the webinar. But if you did not register, if you found this link via Facebook, via our Facebook page invite, then putting your email in the chat will help us get you a recording. So that would be wonderful. Lastly, I just want to give you an idea of the flow of our conversation today. This is going to be a rather informal conversation between NCIPL staff and Partners of Health and Wholeness staff. And we're going to begin with our directors, Susanna Tuttle from NCIPL and Chris Parnell from PHW. They will begin our conversation. There's Susanna. Chris will come in a moment. Then we're going to move to our Partners of Health and Wholeness staff. These are staff members from across the state. They're going to speak to you about their connection to climate change and health and a bit about their focus area and their work. Then I'm going to speak a bit about the kind of high-level climate and health intersection issues that we see in North Carolina and the country, heat index, physical health impacts, and mental health impacts. We'll talk a bit about what we're working on as a group of people trying to address this important intersection, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So I am going to mute myself and pass us over to Susanna and Chris, and thank you again for joining.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for that awesome introduction. And I really am enjoying seeing all of the names and locations and congregations that are showing up on my chat scroll. So if you haven't yet found that chat box, again, that should be somewhere down on your toolbar. One of the other key pieces that helps make this work as a webinar, as for communications, is if you see lots and lots of boxes with lots of names right now, you can go up to your upper right corner and hit speaker view, and that will make the person speaking be the central video that you see. Otherwise, you're in gallery view, and it's whatever your preference is. It's also fun to see all the different names that are here, but that speaker view will help make the speaker be the largest speaker on the call. So yes, as folks arrive, we will go ahead and turn off your cameras and put yourself on mute, and then we will use the discussion time towards the end of the call to make that be something that we work together. So I'll go ahead and do that as folks come on. So yes, again, thank you. My name is Susanna Tuttle. I'm happy to be here with my colleague, Chris Parnell, and she's going to do an introduction for her program area as well. I have been serving as director of Interfaith Power Light in North Carolina since 2011. So moving into almost a decade of doing this work on the ground with communities of faith and people of conscience to address the causes and consequences of global climate change as a moral imperative. NCIPL just completed strategic visioning work in 2019, and we now have a 5-year strategic plan with our vision defined as North Carolina IPL envisions a stable climate where humans live in right and just relationship interconnected with a healthy, thriving natural world. And I wanted to highlight that because that word health is there in our vision statement as we work with our mission to mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. We're going to have some other folks talk about some of our core values of how we've gotten to this point of recognizing what it is that we hold most sacred and why we know we must protect it. Because we embrace faith and spirituality, we are grounded in the interconnectedness of the sacred, the natural world, and one another. Because we embrace justice, we act with inclusion and respect, working in solidarity with vulnerable and marginalized communities. Because we embrace hope, we are empowered to live into our vision for the world, for present and future generations. Because we embrace courage, we speak with a prophetic voice to create equity and restore wholeness to all. And because love is central to who we are committed to ending the suffering caused by climate change. And I share that with you as we developed our strategic plan to very clearly put what we hold as most sacred, our values, at the front of this work. So as a staff member of the North Carolina Council of Churches, I've watched our programs grow. This is the largest staff we've had in the history of our 85 years that we've been an institution in North Carolina. This is our 85th anniversary of the North Carolina Council of Churches. And I am personally and professionally seeing the intersection of our work become increasingly clear for us to engage with and to develop priority initiatives around so that we can not only meet the needs of the congregations in the individual program areas that we have designed, but that we begin to bring the conversation to the center and in the public square of how, why, and where we must act to change and put our faith into action in order to be the prophetic voice that we seek to be. And my partners here on the call today, the staff of Partners in Health and Wholeness, are going to introduce why the work that they're doing is really becoming a guiding light for those of us in the climate action movement. Interfaith Power and Light is a national movement. It's our 20th anniversary this year. So we're excited to be more intersectional in the work that we do to really support the communities on the ground and what's going to bring them into the conversation and help them lead the way with the change. I will briefly state also Interfaith Power and Light is active both at the state level, the regional level, the national level, and the international level. And I'm very proud to be a part with others of you on this call involved with the U.S. Climate Action Network and health, the issues of health at the local level and how they're impacted at the global level are at the forefront of the climate crisis and why we need to address this and take action. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris Parnell, the Director of Partners in Health and Wholeness, to let her explain a little bit more about what they're currently doing and how we see moving our work forward together. Not one step back. Take it, Chris.
Thank you, Susanna. We really appreciate being your first guest on this important series. We're quite honored about that. My name is Chris Parnell. I just entered my 4th year as Director of Partners in Health and Wholeness. The program itself, however, is 10 years old, and started in North Carolina as an initiative of the North Carolina Council of Churches with the overall goal to provide people of faith with the tools they need to lead healthier lives. That goal has not really changed so much over the years. That's what we are still working on, but our initiatives do come into sharper focus, as we'll talk about a little later. We believe that the church remains, whatever faith community that is, remains a central place of influence within a community. And if we can assist congregations in their health goals, their health ministries, we know that that spreads throughout the community and hopefully through our state to have an impact on chronic illness. Our focus is, and really has always been, around 4 cornerstones: healthier eating, active living, smoking cessation and prevention, which, by the way, we thought we were really successful on, but that has come roaring back with vaping, and mental health issues. So those are the 4 things that we primarily concentrate on. We have a staff from Wilmington to Asheville, all in all 7 members within PHW, as we call the program. And each of those individuals work with congregations directly, finding out what their needs are, what their goals are, and helping connect them with resources to achieve those goals. We host community events, regional events, so we would love for you to be on our mailing list and kind of join us at one of those. And we regularly work with resource providers who are also helping on the ground and connecting them with congregations. In the 10 years, the best our data shows, we have over 700 churches across North Carolina who have participated in this. And it's much too long to tell you what they are all doing, but we have great stories and photos on our website, and we'd love for you to check that out at healthandwholeness.org. The work that these churches are doing is not formulaic. It is very much dependent on what their needs are and in their congregation communities and what their resources are. To date, we have done last week counted over 500 mini grants since I've been on board here. And we offer that once a year to congregations that are in what we call our collaborative, and that is congregations who embrace health as a faith issue and decide to join us in this effort. Once a year, they are eligible to apply for up to $1,000. And we have, you'll hear from Michelle, who really runs that program, in a few minutes. There are not a lot of strings put on that program. It really is in existence to help any congregation carry out what their needs are, as long as it relates to health and wholeness. There's lots I could tell you about the program and would love that opportunity, but today I just want to kind of hit the highlights and explain how this intersection became very critical. Every year, as part of our procedures, we interview our churches and we ask, what keeps you from making healthier choices? Because these cornerstones are largely behavioral choices, but a lot of things go into the ability to make the best one. And what we heard 2 years ago was just overwhelming. We heard issues of poverty, which included access to healthy foods, access to medication, access to medical care. We heard a lot of those issues. We heard a lot about the substance abuse and overdose crisis in North Carolina and in the country, affecting a lot of families. And we really started to hear a lot about environmental concerns, especially in our eastern counties after just back-to-back devastating flooding. So with that information, we were very fortunate to receive additional funding to work in the opioid crisis. And Elizabeth Brewington, who is on the call, and I have been, I think we're up to 20 different churches in the less than a year, sitting down with congregations and kind of hearing what their experience is, what their community is going through, what kind of resources they have on board, and where they see their role in this crisis. We learned a lot in the last year, and we chose the path of talking about something called harm reduction. And that is, as I was thinking about this webinar, harm reduction, as we talk in substance use, is really self-explanatory. It's anything that reduces the harm of substance abuse for an individual. And as I was thinking about this webinar and things we're hearing from the churches, I don't think it's too far off to say that what we would love to start talking about, formally with our churches and with the NCIPL network is harm reduction to our planet. What can we do? We would love to talk more about education and what we are able to do within the different congregations in North Carolina to reduce the harm in climate change. That has become a really big issue with a lot of our eastern counties, a lot of our resources, as they are still struggling to just get back up and running after the flooding. So that's a little bit about us. I have two staff members, wanted to mention, that are not on the call today. I don't want to leave them out. We have Karen in Asheville, and Nicole is in Winston-Salem. Everyone else you'll hear from individually, and would love to kick it off with Michelle Peden, who really is the point person for our mini grant program and our collaborative applications. But thank you again for listening to us. I can't wait to hear your questions and your ideas about how we can work together this year. Michelle, to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Peden. As Chris said, I'm the program coordinator for our Partners in Health and Wholeness program, or PHW. I also had the unique opportunity to be working with NCIPL and PHW for almost 3 years simultaneously. So it was a really beautiful privilege to be able to see and hear conversations and be at events where a lot of this work is like colliding in so many ways and overlapping. So it's exciting to see this webinar come to fruition. And as Chris was saying as well, the PHW Collaborative and our mini grant, I'm sort of the point person at our main office in Raleigh. And that includes, answering any questions, being a point of contact for people who maybe have questions about what their mini grant can be used for, or any faith communities, because we also reach out to other faith communities, as in mosques or synagogues. And so it's been really, really beautiful to be the person to get to read all of the wonderful projects and programs that are happening across the state around health and wholeness. And increasingly, we're seeing everybody across the state recognizing that health and wholeness applies to ourselves, but also applies to our faith communities and then the earth that we share with one another. So to see how these programs and projects can be leading into some of the sustainability and the wholeness of our beloved planet is also what we're really hoping to see come out of this webinar and this initiative. So I wanted to mention the HEMES Principles for Democratic Organizing. It's actually a set of principles that are pretty new to me as well. In the past couple years, NCIPL has introduced to the North Carolina Council of Churches the set of guiding principles for working together in solidarity as guidelines for really just working respectfully and effectively between programs, between people, and between movements, because so many of us want to see the betterment of ourselves and our faith communities. And these guiding principles are a way to keep ourselves accountable to that. So yes, Sarah, if you will share the screen briefly, just to have some of the big statements. To me, it's really helpful to be able to see the general statements. And really a lot of the HEMES principles are pretty self-explanatory. To give a very, very brief historical background. So these principles were written and adopted in December of 1996, so they have been around quite a while. But I've seen a lot of climate organizations and movements really adopting these and taking these as values to be living into and to continuously trying to do better and to live into these in a better way. But these guiding principles are guidelines for common understandings between people of different cultures, politics, and organizations. So as you can see, the first one is simply to be inclusive. And in so many ways, that's something that I think we can all agree on. In practice, however, it can kind of be tricky because we have to be more intentional about the way that we're inviting people to the table, making sure that, you know, if we feel like there's a table that we're inviting people to, maybe those tables already exist, and maybe it's better for us to join initiatives and groups that are already doing wonderful work. So being inclusive as it manifests in NCIPL and PHW looks like some of our advisory councils that we have and that we're growing into. It looks like including youth that both NCIPL and PHW are in the midst of working with, and centering voices of color and continuing to offer feedback opportunities to our communities, to our people, at events, on phone calls, and most importantly, in person. The second one that we have is an emphasis on bottom-up organizing. So historically, we've seen sometimes solutions that we see trickle down from the top can potentially be not as effective as solutions and plans and strategies that really come from the people and from the communities that are the most vulnerable and that are being affected the most. So how that looks in NCIPL is we see plenty of communities who are being impacted by environmental justice issues, whether that's pipelines, coal ash, there are so many. And then in PHW, we've seen communities who don't have access to healthy foods in a span that's in a span that's easy to get to, whether that looks like food banks at congregations, or diabetes and access to walking trails. I mean, there are just so many ways that we want to make sure that the communities who are being impacted the most are part of the solutions. Number 3 is to let people speak for themselves. So often we have spotlight congregations that PHW does. We also have success stories that Sarah has been spearheading with NCIPL. We also see continuous surveys and reflections, because really the goal of letting people speak for themselves is to make sure that we're empowering people and bringing them to rooms that are important for them to be able to speak their truth. And number 4 is to work together in solidarity and mutuality. I think that in so many ways, this webinar is a prime example of how we are living into this principle, right? So we are incorporating shared goals between NCIPL and PHW to make sure that our values are intertwined in the work that we're doing. And then continuing to improve communications, strategies, and resources, and all of the work that we're doing so that we can do this better. And I think that all of us would say we are always open to feedback in ways that we can live into this principle even better. Number 5 is to build just relationships among ourselves. So I think this looks like on the individual basis, among people, among colleagues, among even congregants. We're all bringing different experiences to the table, but it also is important to remember building just relationships among ourselves at the program, at the organizational level, at the movement level. And then this is important because everybody's experience and everyone's knowledge is going to contribute to the solution to the ways that we're going to be changing the ways that we live now, the way that we can be better at living convivial with each other. And then number 6 is a commitment to self-transformation. And this is in some ways my favorite because I always follow it up by just a Maya Angelou quote that speaks to this. And it says, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. So PHW and NCIPL in so many ways are growing into these principles within one another, but then together. And I'm so excited to see how these shared values can be intertwined in our work moving forward. So thank you.
Gonna move on to Jessica.
Hello. All right. Thank you all for giving us a piece of your day today. I'm Jessica Stokes. I'm the Eastern North Carolina Regional Coordinator for Partners in Health and Wholeness. I currently live in Wilmington. When I first started with PHW, I actually lived in Greenville. So I've lived in a couple places in the East, have logged hours in various towns and counties, and working with churches and nonprofits across the region. And so I'm grateful for that work. And living and working in the East, I see direct ramifications of the climate on our health. and various intersections of the environment and our health, both with community health and individual health. And so a personal example of this is that in the Cape Fear region, we cannot safely use our tap water to drink or cook or even give water to our pets due to Gen X and other contaminants found in the water due to pollution. So we have, excuse me, everyday consequences on our health from the mistreatment of our land and our water. And that includes Gen X and overall issues of environmental racism and classism, and also the prevalence of particular cancers such as thyroid cancer and skin cancer. And those are just a few examples, unfortunately. A major insight that I have had doing this work is with the relationship between mental health and the environment. With hurricanes, for example, there's a palpable tension that the churches and communities feel each fall. Even if a storm is not coming right that moment, there's still anticipatory grief that comes early August every year with the unknown that comes with each autumn on the coast and even inland. And so anticipatory grief, of course, includes the certains, fear of flooding, loss of power and life, structural damage, but that also includes the grief and anxiety around the loss of security, autonomy, and routine. For instance, children going hungry because they're out of school for sometimes a month, as we saw in Florence and Pender County and even Brunswick County. Loss of paychecks because your job shuts down, hardships getting to dialysis and other medical care that you need on a weekly basis, daily basis sometimes. And evacuating can be incredibly difficult if your car is not reliable, or maybe you are on hourly pay, so you need to stay close in case your job does open back up. Or maybe you raise livestock. There's thousands of reasons that you may not be able to evacuate, even in the situation of a category 4, 3, 4, or higher storm, which are deadly. And so I've heard from pastors and school teachers and various folks about how, for instance, our children are impacted by these storms. You hear times of children becoming unpotty trained or regressing developmentally due to the stress of these storms. We talk about ACEs with our churches, adverse childhood experiences, and there's tremendous work happening around that conversation due to the undeniable trauma that children are surviving through all kinds of levels of life, but that definitely includes these storms and other impacts of the climate change and the environment. And then, of course, all ages experience the physiological aspects of stress and anxiety, with hypertension, high blood pressure, and unhealthy coping practices with alcohol, drugs, whatever. You can make anything an unhealthy coping mechanism. But the point is that I see a lot in my region tied to not just hurricanes, but all sorts of things. Our farm workers, they have to think about surviving a storm, not only physically, but financially, with a loss of crop and whatnot. And then we also have a concern around hog farming and the communities that are surrounding hog farms and those direct health risk. And so I see so much in the East through various contexts and about how health and social determinants are spurred by our environment, our environmental problems and concerns. And so I'm here to learn as well and listen. Please reach out to me, and my email will be posted later. I know Sarah's going to talk about some of the things I've talked on, but I wanted to give my personal experience living where I live, and just know that there is hope happening. There's churches working on these things, and particularly for mental health. And I'm grateful for this work with you all.
We're going to move to Elizabeth. Thank you, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Barrington. I'm the Opioid Response Program Coordinator with Partners in Health and Wholeness. Like Chris mentioned, we have been doing a series of clergy breakfasts across the state, educating clergy around the issues of the opioid crisis. We have done 20 to date, and we've also conducted a series of surveys to gauge what clergy's knowledge and level of interest around the opioid crisis is. One of the ways we've seen the opioid crisis connect to climate change is similar to what Jessica mentioned. Back during the hurricanes, a lot of people were not able to get their medication-assisted treatment due to the treatment providers being closed because of flooding. And so many people would return back to using drugs. This is very dangerous because the drug supply in North Carolina is very heavily influenced with fentanyl in it. And because the black market is not regulated, many people were not knowing what they were taking. This is just one example. There are many other ways because climate change touches everything. But if you're interested in learning more about our work around the opioid crisis, my contact information will be at the end. Thank you.
And now, thank you, Elizabeth. We will move to Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay. I'm the office manager at the North Carolina Council of Churches and the communications associate for Partners in Health and Wholeness. So I do a lot with PHW in terms of social media and digital communications and keeping up our website, and also running our Spotlight program where I write pieces about churches that are doing a lot of this really awesome work, just to kind of lift up their voice and get the word out about, the good work that they're doing. And so I'm really excited to be on this webinar and grateful to really explore more about this connection between the environment and health, because it's real and it's something that I see as a great opportunity to lift up and have more conversations about in our community. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I am now going to talk a little bit about some statistics around the impacts of climate change on physical and mental health. This is some of the information I'm going to offer is hard. It's challenging, and we know that this is a challenging topic. But I just want to prepare us if you need to breathe as we read some kind of hard facts. But the reason I think knowing these statistics around physical and mental health and how they relate to climate change is exactly what Jessica and Elizabeth and Michelle and our other colleagues have noted today, is that climate change does impact health, and it impacts our neighbors and it impacts our communities. And we really can't love our neighbors. We can't love the children in our communities who are learning to be potty trained, and the elderly in our communities, and the farmers in our communities without addressing climate change, because this is an issue that impacts people's lives in so many complicated ways. So as we learn these statistics, I want us to hear them with a knowledge that we're learning them to do something, and we're learning them to be a part of that loving work, that holds our communities up and that makes them more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So I'm going to begin, that said, with some information around the intersections between climate change and physical health. I also will note that I am going to send this information to all of you. So you don't have to be scribbling down notes. But just to begin, I want to begin around disease. So disease spreads in a warmer world. A warmer world is a more diseased world. This is one of our climate and health impacts. Climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress between 2030 and 2050. 2030 and 2050 isn't far off. That comes from the World Health Organization. Rising sea levels and severe weather events destroy homes, medical facilities, and more. Because more than half of the world's population lives within a close proximity to the ocean. This is very problematic. People will be forced to move, and moving also heightens the risk of communicable diseases. So in addition to just the stress of being having to relocate because of a storm, there's also a risk of disease spreading. In regards to heat, I know that those of us in North Carolina have been experiencing very hot summers and also a very hot winter. And extreme heat contributes directly to deaths from cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. That also comes from the World Health Organization. Additionally, pollen and other airborne allergens are more prevalent in warmer climates. So these often trigger asthma, which affects around 300 million people. So in a warmer world, we'll see more asthma. And asthma is also incredibly prevalent with urban communities, particularly communities in poverty. So this again is a justice issue. This is an issue of how we're loving the communities that we're called to love as people of faith and conscience. Natural disasters. So globally, the number of reported weather-related natural disasters has more than tripled since the 1960s. Natural disasters exacerbated by climate change result in over 60,000 deaths every year. Obviously, there are benefits of action, though. Reducing emissions of greenhouse gases through better transport, food, energy use choices results in improved health, particularly through reduced air pollution. Again, that's from the World Health Organization. Now moving to mental health. I hadn't really thought about the mental health impacts of climate change until I was working on creating this presentation, which is now a presentation that I offer to congregations around the state. But really, it's funny that it didn't hit home with me that there would be so many mental health impacts of climate. Obviously, for those on the front lines of climate change, like the stories that Jessica offered to us earlier. But even just for folks working in this movement and working around this issue, this is a very anxiety-producing issue. And so this really does make sense. Mental health. So victims of natural disasters are at an increased risk of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and suicide. 49% of survivors of Hurricane Katrina developed an anxiety or mood disorder. And 1 in 6 developed PTSD, while the suicide rate more than doubled. So these are some of those very hard statistics that I was noting. Again, also after a record drought in the 1980s, the suicide rate doubled, particularly from farmers. So again, just underscoring what Jessica said, people's livelihoods and lives really are on the line when we think about climate change, which again is just such a call to us as people of faith and people striving to work in this movement to address this issue and love them more deeply. Also, there are some factors that increase community susceptibility to the psychological effects of climate change, and they include large populations of older adults, children and infants, disabled people, and recently arrived immigrants, migrants, or refugees, communities with high levels of poverty and or social inequality, and communities with low education levels, levels of social cohesion or connectedness, and low levels of trust. These aspects that make a community more vulnerable to the mental health impacts of climate change are, these are demographics that are present within all of our communities. So we really do this, I think that this statistic, this information really does bring the issue of climate change home to our neighborhoods. This comes from the American Psychological Association. Also, some impacts of climate change on mental health are results of climate change more gradual impacts. So trauma and shock, anxiety, and substance abuse are all responses that can come just from hearing about climate change daily in the news and from worrying about it and embodying that worry. Lastly, I just want to briefly note some particular health impacts in North Carolina. This summer saw 3,611 emergency department visits due to heat-related illness. And the CDC warns in particular that adults over 65 and children under 4 are at particular risk during heat waves, in addition to agricultural workers and young athletes. From 1992 to 2006, The rate of heat-related deaths among crop workers in the United States was the highest in North Carolina. So again, just driving this issue home, it's incredibly important that we think about the ways that climate change impacts so many populations in our state, our communities, our neighborhoods, and the people that we love. That said, we are doing work around this issue. I offer this presentation. NCIPL is committed to doing this work, and PHW is as well. And we're going to talk a bit about that now.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that is hard. I'm just taking that for a second. Yes, PHW, we really have been beginning and continuing the conversation with our PHW congregations to make the faith, health, climate connection. What we have already been really pretty strongly encouraging and asking our PHW congregations to do is to consider the ways they're planning their projects and their programs and their congregations and in their faith communities. We've already been encouraging PHW congregations to consider using less plastic water bottles and maybe water filters. But again, as like Jessica was saying, it's not always possible depending on where you're at, and that's okay. But just an introduction to something to consider in the future at events, after service, things like that. We've also been asking PHW congregations to consider moving away from disposable plasticware, because often they're asking for financial resources for events, for trainings, things that are incredible opportunities to be educating the faith communities and training and really sustainable work. But sometimes at these events, there is disposable plasticware, as in forks or cups or plates. So maybe looking at transitioning into more reusable foodware. A couple other things that we've been asking is even just as simple as printing paper, educational materials. A lot of those materials can be found at local resources, health departments, on a state or national level. There are opportunities to request for educational materials that are already ready to be sent to communities that want to be helping faith communities pass out and disseminate some of that education. And then even things as I say simple, it's not always simple, and I recognize that, but moving away from processed food to fresh fruits and vegetables, it's not always possible. But when we think about finding and providing ourselves and our families and our communities with the healthiest options, that inevitably is helping the environment in our communities as well. That's less plastic, that's less carbon, transporting that. If it's locally sourced, then maybe you're helping your neighborhood farmer out as well, potentially. So really our work with PHW has been to be meeting people where they're at, as everyone has been saying. We are encouraging some of these ideas and transitions, but you know, it's easy for me to say that. I live in the Triangle. I have access to public transportation, you know, all these different things. And that's something to recognize. And I think it is good and valid that so many of our PHW congregations have been focusing on the immediate concerns around our four cornerstones that Chris has mentioned earlier around healthier eating, physical activity, mental health, and tobacco cessation. So meeting people where they're at, I think in so many ways is where we see the intersection of the climate and health conversation within faith communities. So moving into the future, we hope that starting with this webinar, we are introducing a sustainability pledge that we want our congregations to be taking, and then to be offering and introducing to other neighbor congregations. And we're looking for that sustainability pledge to include, but not limited to, so we're open to suggestion. But what we have right now is things like asking our faith leader and lay leaders to be sharing the connection between our faith, health, and climate change, whether that's in a sermon, in a Bible study, or an other sort of worship event. We want to ask to make the faith, health, climate connection in a congregational bulletin and any printed materials on social media, or through emails, if that's something that a congregation is doing as well. And also maybe introducing one practical step for the year, whether that looks like recycling or composting, cutting back on styrofoam, or looking at alternative cleaning materials. Like we've talked about, it's better for the environment, but it's also better for our health inside of worship facilities. And then another option is maybe eliminating pesticide use on our faith community grounds as well. And then often, like I already said, the efforts that benefit the environment are already helping ourselves. And some of these things can even be more affordable, which means that some of these congregations can be using that money that they would have used for something that is less healthy to more sustainable educational training practices that can be making a bigger difference. And then also just a commitment to maybe intentional nature walks or ways that we can ground ourselves in the nature and the ecosystems around us, because I do believe that when we are developing a relationship with the living environment that are around us, that we tend to care about it and feel like we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so those are some of the options for our sustainability pledge. And we do want to hear feedback if there's anything that we're missing, anything that we can improve on. But most importantly, if anybody and everybody on this webinar can take that sustainability pledge and then email it to 5 friends, that's just a way to begin the education and changing the narrative around how we think about health and faith. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody on this call. I think we're moving on to Chris.
Hi again. Just to follow up a little on what Michelle is saying, some of the ways that we've identified that we would love to work together. PHW has started doing as close to zero waste events as we can do. We're making that effort. The sustainability pledge, an example is we've worked with food pantries to try to influence what they offer for folks who do have difficulty obtaining fresh fruit and vegetables. And some have responded. They've done end cap displays like you see at a major supermarket. Some have offered recipes using fruits and vegetables that maybe people are not as familiar cooking with. So there is a lot of work to be done. And in wrap up, I would just say the opportunity, there's a lot of hard things in climate. There's a lot of hard things in health. But we also see a lot of hope. We have a strong network across North Carolina of people who care about health. They're out there, they're doing the work. Certainly we have a strong network with NCIPL. We lean heavily on Susanna, Sarah, and Michelle. We're very fortunate. And now we're hoping to lean even further on this whole network. So if we can identify congregations that have an interest and want to take one step or a mile, we would love to be able to pair the NCIPL folks with some of our congregations and just see how we can help each other out. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And again, I'm just thrilled. There's those moments in time when you hit these milestones of where you're at with the work that we've been doing across North Carolina, and being on this webinar today with all of the staff that were able to participate and the 2 additional staff members of PHW that are out in the field doing the work. I'm very excited. I'm glad that you referenced the hope that we're feeling at the North Carolina Council of Churches about the intersection and dovetailing all of our programmatic work. I was reading internationally news commentary that came out recently that said, we call it climate change. It's more like a global health crisis. And that really is what we're in. I think it's interesting even what we're seeing with the viruses passing and how they internationally are establishing themselves both through the human body, but as we know in the relationship to the temperature change and the environment and how viruses and all sorts of health implications to a changing climate that we have to physically learn how to adapt to and become resilient in. And I think that's where congregations are taking the lead. We are at the heart of the communities. We are also the first responders. And so how we prepare ourselves for hopefully the disaster that doesn't happen, and that the goal is that we will be building those relationships both internally and doing asset mapping within the congregations, as well as in the communities, across denominations, across the state, across the region, the nation, and the world. And I wanted to just speak to what our future forecast is for building out this as a priority initiative that NCIPL is going to help to take the lead on, and continue to engage PHW at the center, at the heart of this work. Many of you know that NCIPL does a lot of advocacy work, primarily to help change hearts and minds so that we can all get together. This is a nonpartisan issue, and we want to pull it out of the political space and into communities, have it be a discussion around the kitchen table. And an example is tomorrow I will be speaking at a press conference, and I'm going to drop into the chat box right now our partners' release of a report through Environment North Carolina called Trouble in the Air: Millions of Americans Breathed Polluted Air in 2018, and the kinds of different resources that we have through our advocacy network. So Sarah and I are still building out the schedule, but we're looking, certainly Environment North Carolina is really excited to come on to our next webinar and talk about this report. We're also involved at the state table for the Climate Action Campaign in North Carolina, of which Environment North Carolina is one of our partners, including North Carolina League of Conservation Voters. We work very closely with the Sierra Club. Lots of resources. There's been a recent report by Children's Environmental Health Network released, specifically focused on North Carolina's children's health. So we certainly are not at a lack of resources, but it's we also want to hear from each of you in the communities of what kinds of programming you would like to see and what are your needs. We're truly here to serve you and your communities and resource you in the ways that you can be the leaders, back to the Jemez principles of letting people speak for themselves, building from the grassroots up, and our commitment to self-transformation. So I think I'm going to turn it back to Sarah to see if there's any questions that have come in. I'm looking at the chat box. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a question. And so we want to go ahead and answer that. And then if there are other questions that come in, and otherwise we'll see, we have just about 5 minutes left, but this is an ongoing conversation at the community level. So thank you again for participating today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And really briefly, before I dive into questions, I just want to say that when I send the recording, I will send some additional information to give context around these issues, some legislative information. We had some questions about that. And I think ultimately what's so important as we begin to work at this intersection is just understanding health as related to climate, and understanding climate change is related to health, knowing that when we hear about climate change, we're really talking about people's lives. And if we can start communicating the issue that way, I think it becomes more and more clear that this is an issue of morality, and that we do this work from a place of a moral imperative. I will send lots of information to you about how NCIPL is addressing climate, and you can get involved in those ways. That said, though, let's move to questions. So Michelle has already responded. The sustainability pledge will be live within the next month. That was one question. And if you are interested in knowing more about the sustainability pledge, which I hope you all are, you can go to phwinfo@ncchurches.org. We had a question about legislation around heat index, and Susanna and I were recently on a national Interfaith Power and Light call and heard about legislation in the federal government around heat indexes. So I will send you information about that. I think that is incredibly important. This is an issue that requires advocacy. And so I will forward that to you all as well. Another question: when PHW comes into a community, do they go to just one church or to a group of the same denomination or several churches in a community?
I'll take this one.
Okay.
So that's a great question. So to be perfectly transparent, we work with whoever is willing. So do we go into a community? I speak for myself. I sometimes will go to clergy groups in different counties. Pitt County has an interfaith clergy group that's very active. So does New Hanover and Brunswick County. Anyhow, various counties, I'll go talk at those meetings. I'm very grateful to have ministers who help me in setting up meetings. So I will come and present to
all kinds of numbers of churches, big and small meetings alike. I go to NAMI meetings, I go to food bank meetings, I show up. So I hope that answers. Essentially, if you invite me, give me a heads up, I will come. That's truly how I work. I can speak for the other regional coordinators. That's how they work as well. And so we work with, as Michelle mentioned, interfaith, Christian, anybody, also nonprofits. I just want to highlight that, yes, we work with the local church and faith communities, but I have found a lot of traction working with other agencies, such as nonprofits and the nonprofit sector and higher education. I've presented, I guest lectured at ECU, and I've guest lectured at a couple different locations, and of course pulpit supply. So the long and short of it is that we try to cast a large net. And so thanks for your question, Penny.
Any other questions? I put this this page up with our contact information. This includes contact information for our Western Regional Coordinator in Asheville, Karen, and also Nicole in the Piedmont Triad. So they couldn't be with us, but they both have extreme amounts of sustainability knowledge. They both actually have degrees and focus areas of their degrees in that work. So they're really good partners to do this work if you're interested. Yeah, are there any other questions?
I was just going to jump in with the question about the farm worker advocacy and heat stress. So there is some organization that I know that I'm a part of, a Google group that sends out emails that's named Heat Stress Network, and it at some points is specifically for farm workers, but also for just outdoor workers in general. And it's been a wealth of knowledge across the country. So it's a lot of different organizations working together to disseminate information, and even webinars. So there's a webinar this Friday, for example, on a discussion with leading experts on climate, migration, labor, and communities. So I would be happy to send with Sarah the how to access that Heat Stress Network Google group.
That would be great. Thank you, Michelle.
Sarah, may I close us with a prayer?
That would be wonderful, please.
Wonderful. Well, this was shared on NCIPL's Advisory Council meeting this morning, and I'm grateful to have it to share with all of you as we close in prayer. Dear God, we give thanks for places of simplicity and peace. Let us find such a place within ourselves. We give thanks for places of refuge and beauty. Let us find such a place within ourselves. We give thanks for places of nature's truth and freedom, of joy, inspiration, and renewal. Places where all creatures may find acceptance and belonging. Let us search for these places in the world, in ourselves, and in each other. Let us restore them. Let us strengthen and protect them, and let us create them. May we mend this outer world according to the truth of our inner life. And may our souls be shaped and nourished by nature's eternal wisdom. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you so much.